Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Alex Wells, and thank you for joining today's session on the cyber response chain presented by Jesper Jurcenoks, who I'll introduce shortly. Just a few housekeeping rules. Firstly, the session is being recorded, and we will be sharing a copy of the recording at the end of the session, as well as a copy of the slides. You should have an option to raise questions or raise a hand if you'd like to have a question answered, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end or as we go. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jesper to kick off this presentation.
Yes, hey, my name is Jesper Jurcenoks, and I'm your presenter today. It's good to see so many of you here, so let's get started. I want to make sure here, Trung, if you can hear us, send a question. I saw your question about sound, so I want to make sure that you can hear us. All right, let's start. So today we're going to talk about the cyber response chain, a framework for cybersecurity professionals, how to manage risk and respond to threats, and specifically how to have the big discussion with the board. So without further ado, here's a little bit of me. Been doing this for a very long time. Got into programming in '82, and I've been doing cybersecurity for 20 years now. So I'm from a little bit around the world. Lived in many countries. Right now I'm living in California, and I'm broadcasting here from Dubai. All right, quick question or a quick overview of Group IB. So we are the leader in Eastern Europe threat intelligence. We've been doing digital forensics for 19 years, and that's a foundation for a lot of the things that we do. We work closely with Europol and Interpol. We have customers, in 60 countries or more, and put a little dot on the map here where we have local presence. So all the way from South Africa and Australia, all the way to the west coast of the US and up in Vietnam. So we are very well represented. All right, today we're going to talk about the board's role, best practices on a very high level. We're going to go something into how we created this cyber response chain, and we're going to talk about how the chain compares to other frameworks, how to use it in annual budget planning, use the chain in scenario testing, and then the questions that the board posed in the beginning, we're going to try and come up with some answers and use the chain for answering that. So again, type in your questions if you have anything. All right, so the standard board reaction to a compromise is, who were they? What did they want? How did they get in? What was the impact? What did we learn? How do we quantify security risk, and what tools should we implement? So before I answer that, let's look at the big answer. And there used to be a time when all we had to do was to stop a breach from happening. Great firewall, great antivirus. If we could stop them at the perimeter, that's how far it got. But today, things go so much further, and the CISOs really get hammered by the boards. So we looked at a little bit about what concerns companies, and 3/4 of CISOs really are worried about the increase in cyber attacks. 88% of board directors now view cybersecurity as a business risk. So we really see the board coming in. The boards will be engaged. So there will be a dedicated cybersecurity committee on the board, overseen by somebody who actually understands cybersecurity in the future. And we're going to see another question coming back, which is, how are you spending your money? How are you showing value for what you're spending? So that will be things that the board will chase us on. All right, so here's the answer. We used to be able to stop things at the perimeter, but now compromise is inevitable. It will happen. And the only question is, how do we keep blast radius and recovery time low? This is basically the best practice for responding to cyber risk. But these two items, blast radius and recovery time, is the high level. If we try and break this down into more dedicated pieces, then it actually turns out that we have 11 steps across 3 stages. So we have the pre-stage, pre-compromise stage, and this is where we prepare, where we harden, we simulate. This is where we get ready for battle. Then we have the enemies at the gate. In some cases, we can block them at the gate. The firewall is still working. But if they make it through the gate, the question becomes, can we see that they're inside the gate? Can we contain them? What do we do with them? Do we redirect them? Do we put them under a microscope? And then once we've evicted them from the network, then we go into recovery mode. How do we get back online? And recovery time here is critical. Gone is the time where we could allow to be offline for weeks while we're trying to restore systems. This is just no longer acceptable. So this is how it goes, and it goes all the way out to forensics. Where were they? What did they take? What did they do? Who were they? What did they want? And can we somehow prevent them from doing it again? All the way out to neutralize. So we're going to go and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this chain. But before we do that, let's talk about how we got here. And similar to how the original hard perimeter defense evolved into defense in depth, spreading out over the network diagram, we are also looking at how we can expand the response to from harden a block over the entire timeline. So this again is defense in depth, but it's not a geographical defense in depth, it's more a time defense in depth. So how do we get here? So customers has been instrumental in forming this chain. We started out in the forensics, and of course we got a lot of questions about data recovery. Then the request came for neutralized via takedown services. There were cloned websites, there were command and control servers that we found. Could we take them down? Could we take them out of the system? Could we neutralize them so that at least the spread was limited a little bit? And then of course, who were they? What did they want? So that brings us into attribution. And we also saw that a lot of people were very, very poorly prepared. So we needed to simulate. This leads to pen testing, red teaming, but also incident readiness. So coming in and doing a DFIR investigation and finding out that audit logging had not been turned on made everything a lot worse. So let's face it, everyone will get breached eventually. Do we have the logging on so we can see where they went, so we know what they did? This is going to be key. So as we started looking into this, we found that MITRE Defend, MITRE Engaged, and this cybersecurity frameworks, these are all great frameworks. They are key to customer response with all their fine-grained details. I can only recommend that you take a good look at many of these frameworks. Another great framework that I work a lot with is PCI DSS. We found that these things, while they all cover it, they don't really cover everything together. So there's still a few holes in the chain that's not fully covered. And another thing we found was the translation between the MITRE attack framework, which is great, and the cyber kill chain is a great way of having the very details of the MITRE attack framework and the very high level of the cyber kill chain, but we didn't have a similar thing for response. So we simply dove in and said, okay, let's synthesize the chain. Let's build a response chain that's as easy to understand as the cyber kill chain. That's how we got here. So here it is again. Let's dive into what is inside each of these steps. So this is what it looks like. On the prepare end, we have incident response preparedness and turning on logging, making sure that log files are stored in the right place, that time sync is in place, all the things that we need so that we have good auditing. This is also where we make sure we have security policies, that our phone chain is up to date. We know who to call. In many cases, we don't want to be in a situation where we have a compromise, but we don't have anybody to call. We call all the fancy companies that does incident response, and they're all saying, sorry, we're busy. So make sure that you already have found out who your incident response company is, have an agreement with them that you can call them, that they're going to be available. In preparation, we also have attack surface management. The thing that comes to mind is, of course, the target breach around Christmas in the US many years ago, when the attack came in through the air conditioned vendor. Nobody would have thought that the air conditioned vendor would be part of the attack surface. And there they went, right? Straight in through that system. So do that, of course, secure design, secure by design, this part of the preparation. And then, of course, the hardening, making sure that our patching is up to date, our automatic patching, our software lifecycle management for the software we develop ourselves, configuration management, make sure that all the code that we made has run through both static and dynamic analysis, that our hard drives are encrypted. This is all hardening the system. This is to make sure that when the attackers come, the chance of success is going to be small, right? So just as an example, time to infect. Let's say we take a good old Windows XP machine, unpatched, and we put it directly on the internet without a firewall. The typical time to infect is about 10 minutes. So the background noise of attacks on the internet is so strong that an unpatched machine will be taken down within 10 minutes, right? If we start hardening hard, we can expand this time so that ideally your corporations can go years without being breached. We will never be totally secure, but a good hardening will deter 99% of the attacks, maybe more. But again, with thousands of attacks per day, some of them are going to make it through. Then we go into the simulation, the automatic simulation, the running an automated pen test, maybe every day, get a report on it, see how we're doing. The annual red teaming, the annual pen test per PCI requirement, other things. This is where we do the tabletop exercises. Let's say we get breached here, here. What do we do then? Of course, ongoing vulnerability assessment. This is all part of the simulate part. Now we come into the battle day, right? How many things can we stop at the gates? This is where our firewall, our next generation firewall, our web application firewall, all these things will stop things at the gate. Our download filter, our spam, our phishing filter, all this will filter out a lot of the attacks that happens. Of course, Wi-Fi encryption is the default today, but a lot of the older encryption schemes, WEP, can be broken in minutes these days. So make sure that you are on the hardest encryption there. Of course, have antivirus. Everybody should make sure that you have antivirus, make sure it's up to date. So all this will take out the brunt of the attacks. IPS, bot prevention, make sure that nobody takes down your system by having a bot that automatically fills out forms and sends an email. Some of them will get through, right? That's the way the funnel works, and that's where it defends in-depth work. There will be a small part that will make it through all these blocks. Even if we have firewalls on every machine, even if every part of our network is segmented, someone will make it through. And this is where detection comes in. We have traditional endpoint detection and response. We have the network. We have NTAs, IDSs. This is the SIMs. This goes in here detecting what's going on. XDR, MDR, managed detect and respond, threat hunting, researchers, And then also, eventually we'll get to a point where people don't have great systems of this, and they're like, before I buy all these systems and turn them on and start measuring background traffic, I want to make sure I'm not already compromised. So this is where compromise assessment comes in, user anomaly detection. So once we've detected that there's somebody in our network, this is where we want to stop the bleeding. We want to make sure it doesn't get any worse. And this is where contain comes in. From very old technologies like tar pit that will literally slow down the scanning from one machine to another in lateral movements, to the good old Cisco self-defending network segmentations. You know, DMC has been around for 20 years, and a demilitarized zone of having an outer firewall, having an inner firewall. This is network segmentation. This is how to contain. If the service in the DMC gets compromised, then it doesn't spread to the inner network. We've been doing this for a long time. So make sure to keep the blast radius down. This is what contain is all about. And then while we know they're in the network, we know they're not spreading, they're not doing lateral movements, they're not doing east-west movements, then the question comes, can we redirect some of this traffic? Can we take them into a forensics environment? Can we see what they're after? Where do they come from? Can we lure them into leaving some traces? Do we have decoy objects? In some cases, we use the decoy objects as well for detection. We know that there are certain things that look very tempting, but if there's any access to it, we know that it's an attack. Like a server called bookkeeping, a server called financials that nobody uses. But if there's access on it, we know that these are bad guys. So decoy objects come in here. Also the sandboxes. A good sandbox will look just like the real thing. And the malware that comes in there will think that it's the real thing and will detonate. So this is all part of the redirection. Now that we contain them, now that we've had a look at them, we've evicted them from the network, now we start with the whole recovery phase. This is where our offsite backups are really, really, really important. We want to make sure that we have failover systems. If a data center is down, we have another data center we can fail over to, failover servers. This is where we do build scripts. So the old concept of restoring a server from backup is tedious. And even if we have a machine that has been compromised, even if we patch it now, I will always have the nagging feeling that there's something left on the machine that I didn't catch. This machine will still be compromised. There will still be an attacker somewhere hiding some process somewhere. The only way to do it is a clean format and then reinstall it. And the fastest way to do that is to have a build script that does it automatically. Same for infrastructure. Infrastructure as code, wipe the whole thing clean, rebuild from scratch. So this is all about recovery. Then all the things that we, when we did the containment, did we image it? Did we collect the evidence? Do we have a good chain of evidence? Digital forensics, imaging. And in this part is also where we look at the kill chain. How did they get in? What did they do? What can we learn? How can we strengthen this? So that's part of the forensics process. This is where we do malware code analysis. If we found some weird code in there, what can we learn from the code? Can we see who it is? Does this code use processes and calls that are always used by certain groups? So that brings us straight into attribution. In the attribution, we have the malware analysis, and we can tell from the way the code is structured, both the programming languages and certain functions that they use, with high certainty, who made this code. And this is where it gets interesting, right? Are these people who are in here for ransomware? Are they here just to take our money, or are they here to steal the plans to the new aircraft? Why are they here? What can we learn from them? Are they here to steal the latest Sony movie? Are they here to do something else? So what's the motivation? And by understanding the motivation, we can also better defend, because there's a good chance that these guys will come back. And if we understand what it is they want, we can adapt our defenses to that. And then last but not least, once we've de-anonymized, then we can hand them over to the FBI, we can hand them over to Interpol, to Europol, and with a bit of luck, these people will end up behind bars. That's one less thing to worry about. So yeah, this is neutralize, disrupt money laundering networks. In many cases, a lot of ransomware, other things, stolen money, they have to be laundered. We can disrupt the money laundering network, then it gets a lot harder to be a criminal. So that's what we want to do. Of course, takedown services. Every time we can get somebody to take down a command and control server, that's really interesting. If we can then get them to send us the command and control server so we can start taking it apart and see what happened inside, then there's a gold mine of information. All right, so how does this compare to other frameworks? So if we look at the cyber response chain, which I have at the very top, with the 11 steps from prepare all the way to neutralize, we'll see that a lot of the current frameworks are heavily front-loaded with MITRE Engage and SANS ISERL going deeper into the end. So MITRE Engage and SANS ISERL are more response to the attack during the attack, where PCI is very heavily on preventing the attack to begin with. MITRE Defend is also around prevention, so very heavy in the front load. And it's obvious that none of these actually cover everything. So this chain here is a really nice way to make sure that we cover all the bases. If we tie ourselves to one of these frameworks, we end up with gaping holes in our defense. All right, so I did a little budget simulation example here. So how do we use the chain in annual budget planning, right? And the first answer is awareness helps, right? Just knowing that this is a way to think of it, showing it to the people that you discuss your budget with, gets a much better discussion going. And I just took 100% of a budget and I kind of spread out the percentages. I assume that your percentages are going to be a lot different than the one I used in this example. And I still think that it's a good example to use. So I specifically de-emphasized on the blocking, and I'll come into why I did that. So I only gave 10% to blocking. I think simulate, while important and must be done, it's not very expensive. So you can actually do a lot of simulation for few money. Many companies don't spend a lot of effort on the redirect step, and that's perfectly okay. So I just put a little money in here. Forensics and attribution are actually very, very cheap compared to everything else. So can be had for very little money. And then detect and contain is things that, in my opinion, are now getting to a point where we have to put some money here. In the recent years, we've had a lot of investments in Harden. We had a lot of investments in Block. I think detect and contain in general is where we have a soft spot in our defense. But again, depending on your industry, your compliance requirements, and your specific threats, make sure that that those are all taken into account when you start distributing out the percentages. And you can actually get away with putting 0% down for neutralize, because a lot of vendors actually include this for free. So so that's nice. It just means that make sure the step is covered, even if you don't have to pay extra for it. Another way to look at it is to compare it to the technology and life cycle. So I used a very common graph, a graph that you might have seen from crossing the chasm. And in this particular graph, we'll see that when a new technology comes in, when the techies and the visionaries are buying it, the price is very, very high. That's what this white line here indicates. And as we move across the technology life cycle, the price will go down. And that means that we can rebalance our budget. So when firewalls first came out, they were very expensive. I'm sure many of you have used millions on Cisco firewalls and other major vendors of firewalls. And the good news is that this is becoming commoditized. The price of firewalls are going down. New technologies that come out, like next generation firewall, they're expensive for a while. Then that price starts coming down too. And as the price for different technologies come down over the technology life cycle, that leaves us room to rebalance our chain and say, okay, I don't need to spend as much. I have a really good coverage in blocking for relatively few money. Let me start sprinkling that money somewhere else on the chain so that I can get my defense in depth. All right, so we had a question, and that is how to use the chain to explain a compromise. And the answer really is that the chain is not for the compromise itself, it is for the response to the compromise. So to explain the compromise in itself, please stay with the cyber kill chain. It is excellent for that. And I put these two orthogonal to each other. I put them at an angle to each other because this chain over here, the cyber kill chain, really only is about what happens here in the block, detect, and contain phase. So this chain applies only in this little section here, and then we have all the stuff that happens before and all the stuff that happens after, and that's what covers the response. So they live together in the same universe and they cover different things. All right. So when we come to scenario testing and planning, so here's my recommendation to you for the next tabletop exercise, which is prepare. Want to use the chain here. Use the chain and say, okay, what happens here? What happens here? We're under attack. They go here. They go here. Are we up to date? So use the chain to make sure and see if you have all the bases covered. And then, of course, once you actually do have a compromise, use the chain again to evaluate where do I need to strengthen my chain to catch this kind of attack. So a good analogy is if all your neighbors are getting broken in through their windows, don't spend money on enforcing your door. So there's room to learn. And again, the question is not how should I, where should I spend my money? The question really is, you should probably spend it over the entire chain. All right, so back to how to use the chain with the board. So when the board says, who were they and what did they want? Here's the attribution and the intent. Right? If you have a vendor, if you have a product that takes care of the attribution for you, then there you go. There you have it. You can also retrieve it from the forensics team that gives it to you. How did they get in? You'll use the cyber kill chain to explain that. What was the impact? Here's the forensics report that comes from the forensics team that you have on speed dial on your phone. What did we learn? Well, here you use the cyber response chain. We've identified these gaps in our cyber response chain. You show the chain, you explain it. You don't have to show all the little points, but you overall show the entire chain. How do we quantify a security risk? We've assigned a risk percentage to each step of the chain. This is something you do internally, and you can assign a risk percentage and want to make sure that you have a balanced in risk. Doesn't necessarily mean that your budget is also going to be balanced using the same percentages, because you can say, I have a high risk percentage on the block, so I want to have a lot of coverage on block, but because that's a mature technology, it might actually be pretty cheap money-wise. And then what tools should we implement, right? And the answer really is security is a product of people, process, and technology, and the cyber response chain reveals our gaps. All right, I have a few questions for you guys, and please get your keyboard. So how does this model fit in your existing model for responding to compromise? And when you answer, just, yeah, you can write a little number and then you can write your answer. How does your existing model cover something, or does your existing model cover something that's not in this chain? How is your chain balanced? Which part of the chain do you like the best? If you could change one thing about the cyber response chain, what would it be?
Cool. We've got here a question already, or sorry, an answer already. One referring to number 3, saying we have heavy emphasis currently on our perimeter security, and we need to reevaluate that, which is the exact sort of thing that we were looking to highlight with this. So thank you for that. I've got another one here saying I like the attribution and neutralize part of the chain. I can see the benefit in attackers not coming back, but I don't necessarily want to pay extra for it. Once it's out of my network, it's not really my problem. I'd like, you know, but I like the idea of getting this included for free by vendors.
All right, anybody else out there?
Got one here. It says, I like the chain and I'd like to be able to share it with my team as a white paper. Will it be available in that format?
Alex, you're the host. Will we make this available?
Yes, so the white paper will be available shortly. However, the recording and the slides will be available much sooner. So yes, I've got a note of your email address and I'll be following up with you once the white paper is complete.
All right, let's open the floor. Let's see here. I think I have conclusion here. So use the cyber response chain to identify gaps, rebalance budget, and align stakeholders. Right? And what do you get out of that? Of course, you get better managed risk, more security for your buck, and faster budget approvals. And with that, I'm going to open the floor to questions, and we can go back and look at slides while we do that. And I'm actually going to go to this slide because a lot of questions come in here.
Cool. Great timing, because there's actually a question which says, are all of the services listed here required for a good security posture?
No, they're not. I think these are examples of services that fall in each category. And I think, for example, if you have a good SOAR, then you already probably have taken care of your account logging process and other things. This is more as an inspiration. Want to make sure that you have something for blocking and you have something for detection. Is it enough? That depends on your industry, but you know, do you need all of them? Probably not. You can probably do with an XDR without a SIM, or you can, if you have EDR, you don't have to worry about antivirus because it's included in the EDR. So no, you don't need them all. But look at this list. Look at the make sure that you're covered on all the bases. Right? You don't want to find yourself going, oh, I have 20 products in this category and I don't have anything in these 3 categories. That would probably be a very unbalanced chain.
Cool. Thank you, Jesper. There's another question here. So my security architect can evaluate the technical components of most of the elements. How can we find a good vendor for forensics and attribution services?
Well, I would say there are vendors who claim to be good in DFIR, and there are vendors who actually publish reports on findings. So, of course, the Verizon Breach report is very popular for that. But there's also, we publish a lot of reports. I think for DFIR, a guy like a blogger like Brian Krebs, he likes to read reports, he likes to quote them. So that's a good place. There's no, to my knowledge, there's no global clearinghouse for great DFIR. When it comes to neutralize, there's an international association of CERT teams that talk together and do takedowns together. So a member of that is a good place to start. There's a lot of public organizations and government organizations in that CERT team, and there's a few private vendors in there that you can go to.
And what are the main mistakes you see when CISOs are putting together annual budgets?
I think the main mistake really is to put too much emphasis and too much money into the front loading. So any attack that you can prevent is much cheaper than cleaning up after an attack. So you want to make sure that you have everything in place over here. But these are also very, very mature technologies, right? I started in vulnerability assessment in 2002, and by then that industry had already been around for a couple of years. Vulnerability assessment these days are a dime a dozen. It doesn't cost much and is pretty high quality. The same for pen test. So you want to make sure you have it, but don't spend all your money there. You know, one of the things that we see when we go in and do forensics is that the enemy has been on your network for a very, very long time. In many cases, they've been on your network for 200-300 days. That's a lot of damage. So make sure that you catch them early. Right? And a proper system, a proper detection system can detect them really fast. I was looking at some statistics from our own system here the other day, and in general, we catch intruders within 5 days. So, you know, I think 50% of the intruders are caught within the first 12 hours or less, and we have 99.9% are caught within 5 days. So make sure that you can detect them. Just a little statistics here. Most of them, so ransomware wants to go in and then they want to detonate the ransomware fast. Right? There's no point in lurking around the network for a long time if your intent is to extort money. So you want to come in, you want to extort fast. But in most cases, you know, we see that the ransomware guys are running around the network for about 20 days before they trigger the ransomware. But if you have good detection that can detect the intruders within 5 days, then you can save millions.
Great. And how do more modern network security technologies like Zero Trust or SASE fit into the cyber response chain?
Excellent question. So these really fall into the contain section. So the Zero Trust network really operates on the same principle as I'm talking about here. Everybody will be compromised eventually. You cannot say, oh, this is the CEO's laptop, it will never be compromised. I can tell you, that's the one that will be compromised first. So might as well face it, right? And this is where Zero Trust comes in. We don't trust anything that's plugged into the network until we validated that it's the right person on this machine. Still, Zero Trust machines get compromised too. This is where single host network segmentation comes in. This is where we detect anomaly traffic. We turn off the ports on the switch. What was the, oh yeah, SASE. So SASE, again, security in the cloud, network enabled security and cloud enabled security. These are excellent both on the tech level and on the contain level. you absolutely want to have these.
Great, and I think that's about it for the questions. There are one or two others which are slightly more in depth, which we'll respond to via email. But other than that, I think that's all of the questions answered, and we can probably close the webinar here unless there's any last minute questions. No, it looks like that's it. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Jesper for presenting this webinar.
Yes, thank you.